On November 6th, Venus will leave her home sign of Libra and enter Scorpio, and immediately begin applying to a square with Pluto and Aquarius, which will go exact the following day, around midnight on November 7th. And this represents a bit of a jarring shift as far as Venusian matters are concerned. Venus in Libra is conscientious, it's sociable, good at creating connections at various levels, from the casual to the deeply intimate and romantic. And part of the virtue of Venus in Libra and being in an air sign is that there's an ability to maintain appropriate distance based on generally accepted social customs, right? Which can certainly vary from place to place or situation to situation. But in general, this observance of and adaptation to the consensus understanding of what is the appropriate way of relating to somebody based on all manner of socio-cultural factors tends to make people comfortable and tends to naturally facilitate relationships progressing along healthy lines and are easy to maintain harmony in. That comes a bit more naturally to Venus in Libra. While with Venus in Scorpio being a water sign, Venus has the water to create and pursue successfully connections, emotional connections, bonding. Connection is one of the primary qualities of water signs, the ability to connect. But because of the nature of Scorpio, which is both concerned with the endurance or longevity of connections as a fixed water sign, and is very protective of connections, as I've discussed in the past, when water flows through a pipe, in order for it to flow through a closed system, there needs to be the existence of negative pressure somewhere in that system in order to pull the water along. Unless there's a break somewhere, then it can just flow out. That negative pressure has to exist. So there's this quality of hunger or awareness of an absence. There's a longing and a depth and a deeply desirous quality to Scorpio, which Venus takes to quite readily. Venus in Scorpio can be quite desirous for connection and sometimes fixated on connecting with a particular object of desire. And that's part of the magnetism or attraction of Venus in Scorpio, is that hunger, that being drawn towards somebody who's got it for you bad, right? Or is just focused on you. And that level of focus and intensity can be uncomfortable and sometimes socially creates social problems in some cases. So it's not always appropriate, or it can just make some people uncomfortable. This is part of the strength of Venus in Scorpio, as well as the thing which tends to get it in trouble sometimes. That fixation and that hunger and that desire and that potential for insatiability can feed into an obsessive quality, or sometimes a tendency to draw in relationships which are dangerous or emotionally volatile. And now with Venus applying to a square with Pluto and Aquarius, Pluto introduces this fear and potential experience of alienation or rejection or not being seen or accepted, which can amplify that sense of negative space, that sense of hunger and desire, which can push us more towards extreme reactions or behaviors when it comes to the pursuit of connection or within our experience of desire. And often with Scorpio in general, you'll get this intense fixated pursuit on objects of desire or on the fulfillment of needs or the seeking of revenge, right? But you'll also get what can sometimes show up as a sort of tendency towards asceticism or abstaining from the pursuit of objects of desire, often after having had a tumultuous relationship with their desires. You'll see, because of the inherent danger or awareness of can sometimes be a futile cycle of fulfillment and hunger and fulfillment and hunger. And you often see people with planets in Scorpio having at least some relationship with abstinence or withdrawing or refraining from pursuing certain dangerous activities or bad habits. And with Venus in Scorpio, you'll sometimes get an aversion or hesitancy or even refusal to participate in intimate relationships because there's a fear of the vulnerability or of the getting sucked into that cycle, right? So particularly around this square with Pluto, a lot of what might get stirred up is this fear of rejection or alienation and how we respond to it. Do we double down and say, no, you will look at me, you will never let me go, right? Do we pursue the fulfillment of that desired connection even harder, or do we back away entirely and potentially become isolated? These are some of the things that might get stirred up around this early part of Venus in Scorpio. However, another big part of what's happening with Venus right now is that Venus has recently entered the phase where her proximity to the sun is beginning to cause her to disappear under the beams of the sun, which is traditionally identified as about 15 degrees. However, in reality, that point where a planet actually disappears under the beams of the sun can vary quite a bit, depending on the sign and the season and where you are in the world. We won't get into that. Suffice it to say, this is the beginning of a new and separate phase for Venus, where she's direct in motion and she's moving faster than the sun and applying to the conjunction. And this is the superior conjunction, unlike the inferior conjunction, which takes place when Venus is retrograde. The superior conjunction takes quite a bit longer to complete, and we experience quite a bit of time where we are unable to see Venus at all in the morning or evening sky. But this process is characterized by Venus having been a morning star for some time now, since Venus stationed direct during the last retrograde period, which was earlier this year in Aries and Pisces, and Venus in her morning star phase, where she is rising in the morning before the sun. And so that's the time that she's visible, hence why we call her a morning star in that phase. This is a much more outgoing mode for Venus. For Venus, it can be a little bit more self-oriented in the sense that because it is associated with the part of the sky which rises in the morning, which part of the sky that's rising is always the first house, it's the ascendant. So it has that kind of built-in association with self and identifying what the individual desires and what they like, what they don't like, and seeking to draw in more of what they find desirable and, push away what they don't, as opposed to Venus as an evening star, where Venus tends to be a little more other-oriented, a little more focused on identifying the qualities, needs, desires of other people and adapting oneself to fulfill those, or simply be a little bit more of an appreciator or observer of others, which is a little more archetypally in line with the ideal Venus in a sense, because Venus is a nocturnal planet and it is the planet primarily concerned with creating relationships with others. This is a little more natural for Venus, intended to be better at creating enduring, long-lasting relationships. Not that if you have a morning star Venus, you're doomed to terrible relationships and being, a selfish asshole. That's far from the case, but it just pushes things, in one direction or the other. Now, in order to become the evening star Venus has to go through this superior conjunction, has to dive under the beams of the sun and disappear for a while. In fact, Venus won't reach that 15-degree point distance from the sun that is classically associated with planet being free of the beams of the sun. Again, that can vary based on sign and location in the world. But in essence, we won't see Venus again until about March of 2026. This is a good 4 to 5 months or so. And so you can kind of think of this process for Venus as being a little bit like soul searching or going out in search of a higher love, right? It tends to be more concerned with the more abstract or less visible components of beauty or desire or love or connection. And as with any planet that goes under the beams of the sun and eventually conjoins the sun and emerges once more, it's going through this process of purification, burning away the impure or the material components of what that planet represents in order to connect more deeply with the spirit of that planet. So love and beauty less attached to objects and more as an expression of something spiritual or something ideal or a sort of principle. And so this is the beginning of that journey, and it will take about 2 months or so for Venus to reach the conjunction with the sun, which will be taking place in January. in Capricorn. So this is kind of a longer process. This is a dive into the non-material side of Venus. But being still on the morning star side, we're trying to get to the heart of what it is that we desire, but becoming more interested in connections which are less superficial, that are maybe more shared, based on shared beliefs, rather than the material, aesthetic, or sensual value they bring, and more on how they align with who we are on a more foundational level, and that maybe have the capacity to endure distance, or poverty, or hardship, or dry spells, or just bad days, right? It's a little more about the idea of relationship and committing to a relationship, not because you're having hot sex every day or they make a lot of money and buy you purses every week, right? It's that sounded harsh, but it's less based on those things and more about committing to the idea. And this can be a very interesting thing to observe with the Venus cycle, is if you look at where the last retrograde took place in Aries and Pisces, and what parts of your life that represents, and the ways which you maybe achieve some clarity on what you want in those areas of life, what you don't want anymore, and perhaps set about trying to bring more of that in. This phase of Venus will often be the point, or be marked by a sort of testing of our commitment to what we started after the last retrograde, and we see a sort of streamlining or purifying of whatever that thing is. Say, it took place in your 9th house, and during the retrograde, made up your mind to undertake a new course of study. So now that you've had some time studying that thing, you've had some experience with it, you've identified things you do like, things that you don't like about it. This is where maybe you start going through the process of zeroing in on the principles behind your desire to pursue that particular field or that course of study, and whether or not it's truly in line with the principles that underpinned your initial pursuit, and getting clear on whether or not continuing that course of study in this case is worth maybe some of the headaches that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, some of the things you don't like about it. Or if it's maybe a little bit off target, then, maybe adjusting course a little bit. But this is the process that we're beginning. Now, the final thing I want to say about Venus and Scorpio is that as it enters Scorpio, it is also beginning to become involved in this Grand Water Trine, bringing the Venusian perspective, or the significations of Venus, into what it is we're trying to work out in the water signs right now. And a lot of this I've already discussed earlier in the full moon video, as well as in the new moon in Libra video, which I highly suggest you check out. Also, if you haven't already, it would still be worthwhile to check out the videos for your rising sun or moon sign to get a little more information on how this Grand Trine is impacting your sign specifically. But a lot of what we're building towards is this new moon in Scorpio taking place on the 19th. And we'll most likely talk a little more about Venus's involvement in it when we do that video. But for now, you can think about this Grand Trine now having this Venusian element introduced into it. We're seeing how this ongoing review of the state of our relationship to a set of ideas, or a particular mode that the world around us has been operating in, is now going away, or taking on a new shape. We're saying our goodbyes to it, and we're coming to terms with what that means for us internally. Venus is going to connect us more deeply with how this change in paradigm, or how the expectation built on the now passing old world, if you will, has impacted our relationships, or our expectations about our relationships, or how it's informed certain desires. And we may feel more deeply the longing for, or absence of, or even sense of the impermanence of the current state of things, and figuring out how to let go, or to simply enjoy what remains, even though it's impermanent, even though it will pass, which is going to be part of the challenge of this. It tends to be the strength of Venus when it's in Pisces, is that ability to detach from the individual moment and sort of appreciate it, and not try to hold on too tightly to it. And I think part of Saturn stationing very close to the degree of Venus's exaltation is going to be bringing a lot of that up, that maybe tension around wanting to be able to appreciate these sort of closing moments of a period and enjoy it without getting caught up in the anticipation of its absence, or in some cases being so enamored with this idea of how things should be and should continue to be that we refuse to acknowledge passing, or we try to hold on to something which isn't going to be able to be sustained. And this isn't as, terrible and heavy necessarily as it sounds. We go through these periods all the time. If you have kids, you're going through at least half a dozen of them throughout their childhood. But these things continue to happen throughout our lives where, period of our life ends and it's time to move on to the next thing. This just happens to have a bit larger of a scope and applies to things on a larger scale on an era of the world where that isn't going to be the way it was. It's going to be a new world. So, don't go down with the ship of the old one, right? But we can figure out what we want to keep. What is worth holding on to? What is worth carrying on into the new paradigm? And what do we have to let go of? Hey gang, wanted to take a quick break to tell you a little about the 2026 Magic Dates Electional Astrology Guide, written by astrologer and friend of the channel, Joe G, and myself, in collaboration with Astrology Hub. The guide includes 24 of the most auspicious dates of 2026 with full write-ups, rigorously handpicked by Joe G and myself, which you can use to time those big events which you want to go as smoothly as possible, like launching a business, planning a date, or founding a cult. It also includes timeframes for the most powerful transits of the year, so you can coordinate your endeavors and make sure that the astrological winds are at your back. And what's actually really cool is that purchasing the guide also gives you the option of syncing this guide with your calendar, so you can easily plan your activities around what the astrology most readily supports. So if you want to get access to high quality and aptly named elections such as the Revelry, the Hail Mary, or my personal favorite, the Golzuka, you can pick up a copy and support the channel at the same time by heading over to www.astrologyhub.com/magickyle. That's www.astrology.com/magickyle. There will be a link in the description as well. I really hope you check it out. Joji and I really poured our hearts into picking these dates and doing the write-ups and had a lot of fun while we were at it. So I'm actually really proud of our work. So yeah, go check it out.